The truth is, Aleister Crowley considered himself the most wickedest man in the world and called himself the Beast 666. He dedicated his entire life to darkness and wickedness and worshipped himself, considering himself a god. He was willing to lead an open rebellion against God until his death, and even after his death, he influenced many to imitate his way of life. Now he represents a symbol of freedom for some. Free from what, you may ask? Join me in this episode as we uncover the dark truth about Aleister Crowley. Who is Aleister Crowley? That is what you may be asking yourself right now. Why should you even care about this dead old Englishman? Well, I'll tell you the reason. Aleister was an occultist and a Satanist who practiced dark magic and is responsible for the sexual abuse of countless children. His satanic lifestyle has been praised by the biggest names in pop culture, influencing our modern times more than you may think. Crowley preached the same demonic message that Lucifer once did: do what thou wilt, which means do as you please and disregard the consequences. Crowley was no doubt the evilest man in the world. His evil started very young. His own mother used to call him the Beast and had a difficult time with his behavior. Both of Crowley's parents were Christians, but his father was more devoted to his religion, even being a traveling preacher. Crowley's parents were very wealthy, and the moment his father passed, when he was only 11 years old, he inherited a third of his father's wealth. This is what began to change Crowley, as he took his father's death poorly and he started misbehaving in school and would be kicked out. When he was in his young teen years, he would start to do drugs and indulge in prostitutes. This made his mom decide to move the two elsewhere, hoping this would help with his behavior, which it did not in the slightest. In 1987, Crowley experienced a brief illness which made him question his mortality. At the time, he was living in Russia and he was trying to pursue a political role. This illness is what changed him forever, as he swore from the moment on to dedicate his life to the occult. In 1989, Crowley got his hands on a book of spells called the Book of Black Magic and Pacts. This book furthered Crowley's fascination into black magic. This led Crowley to meet Julian L. Baker in 1898. Both had a devoted interest in alchemy, which they would normally discuss together. This led Julian to initiate Crowley into the Order of the Golden Dawn. The initiation took place in London's Mark Mason Hall. After this, Crowley would move close to that area and invite members of the order to live with them and be his magical tutor. The tutor taught Crowley more about ceremonial magic and ritual use of drugs, and together they performed the rituals of Gotia. Crowley would start going through the lower ranks of the Order of the Golden Dawn. When he would be initiated into the higher inner circles of the group, he met initial resistance with a member refusing him because he was too chaotic for the order. They did not like his bisexual lifestyle, so he traveled to another lodge in Paris where a friend initiated him into the lodge. After this, Crowley found himself traveling to Mexico City in the year 1900. This is where he became a Freemason. In 1903, Crowley would marry a woman named Rose, so she wouldn't be forced to go through an arranged marriage. Crowley then later fell in love with Rose, and in 1905, him and Rose would arrive in Cairo and proclaim themselves Prince and Princess. Rose and Aleister even had a child and named her Lilith. They rented an apartment and quickly turned it into a temple and began invoking ancient Egyptian deities. This is when Crowley states that Rose will become possessed and speak in tongues, telling him that they were waiting for him. She later explained that the day she was speaking about were the gods of Horus. This is very important. I have spoken about this in the past. Those gods that she speaks of were actually fallen angels who were portraying gods, but were just demons that were Lucifer's disciples. On March 20th, 1905, Rose proclaimed that the equinox of the gods has come. She guided Crowley to a museum and showed him a 7th century BCE mortuary stele known as the Stele of Anak. Crowley thought that it was important that the exhibit was numbered 666, the mark of the beast. On April 8, 1905, Crowley heard a disembodied voice in his head that claimed to be Alves, the messenger of Horus. Crowley said that he wrote down everything the voice told him and later called it the Book of the Law. The book proclaimed that humanity was entering a new aeon and that Crowley would serve as his prophet. It stated that a supreme moral law was to be introduced this aeon. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and that people shall learn to live in tune with their will. If you've been watching most of my videos, you've heard me mention this very phrase in countless videos. This is what our modern society is built upon, a spiritual and moral freedom. Crowley was instructed by literal fallen angels to bring in this new order. This new world order goal has been set since God vanished Lucifer from heaven. Crowley devoted his life to Satanism and to live out Lucifer's orders. Crowley would climb mountains and perform sex magic rituals, even performing blood sacrifices on top of them. In 1912, Crowley started calling himself Baphomet. He literally performed sex magic rituals with hundreds of people. He would even force children to watch and use children in his rituals. What's very interesting is that Aleister Crowley has influenced many pop culture icons who themselves were very influential. For example, like the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Jay-Z, Ozzy Osbourne, just to name a few. A few years ago, a rapper, Ab-Soul from TDE, an affiliate to Kendrick Lamar, wrote an entire album dedicated to Aleister Crowley. He called the album Do What Thou Wilt. Jay-Z also shouted him out in his career on his Run This Town video, wearing Do What Thou Wilt on his shirt. Ozzy Osbourne even made a hit song, Mr. Crowley, for Aleister. The Beatles and Michael Jackson both put Crowley on the cover art for their albums. It's important to note the importance of this. These artists all practice the same wickedness that Crowley did. They all look up to him and honor his lifestyle and wanted it for their own. They truly look at Crowley as a prophet of Lucifer. Crowley spoke directly with demons and was instructed to bring in the New Age. He devoted his life to sex magic, using it to summon demonic forces so they may continue to guide him. It is no coincidence that millions of children go missing to never be found again. All over the world, children are being trafficked and sold to members of these satanic occults. Just in 2010, the Kid Willie sex cult was discovered, and they were operating for decades in London and then Wales. They kidnapped and brainwashed children, often raping them and assaulting them, performing satanic rituals with them. What's interesting, when they were caught, it was discovered that they were using Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law as their spell book. They used Crowley's teaching to harm children and perform satanic rituals on them. These very things are still happening today. The sake of our children still remain at stake today while they still practice these demonic teaching. We all heard of what Epstein was doing in his private island and in his loft in Manhattan. I can assure you the same rituals were taking place. The demons that spoke to Crowley told Crowley he would be the prophet of the New Age. This is exactly what has taken place. Just take a look around. The world we live in has now been taken over by Lucifer. People do what thou wilt every day without ever thinking about the consequences. We live in a world where impulsive decisions have become the only decisions people know how to make. Crowley successfully achieved his goal of bringing in the New Age. The artists used Crowley's teaching for demonic blessings, and the demons used the artists to spread a satanic agenda. We must remember that we're in a spiritual war, a war we can't afford to lose. We must not let these artists confuse us into following Aleister into our own damnation. We must protect our children and prevent them from further abuse.